GOP leaders in Congress take a cue from states like Florida, introducing a federal Don't Say Gay bill. We'll tell you who is supporting the measure. Plus, we'll sit down with singer-songwriter Elizabeth Wyld. And the Empire State Building goes purple, and others are following suit. We'll tell you why. That's all coming up on Advocate Today. Hello and welcome to Advocate Today. I'm Rachel Smith, in for Tracy E. Gilchrist. Well, a group of 30 GOP lawmakers are throwing their support behind what some are calling a federal Don't Say Gay bill. Louisiana Congressman Mike Johnson and 32 other Republicans introduced the Stop the Sexualization of Children Act. Now, the bill would prohibit the use of funds for programs containing sexually oriented material for kids under the age of 10. The bill defines that as images, descriptions, and simulations of sexual acts and genitalia. It prohibits teaching gender identity, gender dysmorphia, transgenderism, and sexual orientation. Critics say the bill stigmatizes LGBTQ+ families and queer children. The Supreme Court will hear the case of a Colorado cake designer who refused service to queer couples. Arguments will begin in December that the cake designer argues that serving LGBTQ+ customers violates her Christian beliefs and her free speech rights. She originally filed suit in 2016, challenging Colorado's LGBTQ inclusive non-discrimination law. Well, she has an album called Delicate Creatures due out soon, and now Elizabeth Wyld is using her platform to talk about her journey as a queer artist. Tracy E. Gilchrist spoke with Wyld about her upbringing, finding her identity, and more.
We are here with Elizabeth Wyld, and you have a new album coming out. But first, I would love to just get a little bit of background on when you began playing music and some of your earliest kind of inspiration for music.
Sure. So I grew up in a very musical family, but throughout my childhood, I kind of took more of the theatrical route. So I was, like a little theater kid. And then like every time as I got into high school, every time I would go through a heartbreak or my parents are arguing or whatever, I would write songs. And that was kind of my way of just coping with difficult times.
Yeah.
And then I moved up to New York City after college and kept pursuing theater. And then this thing happened called vocal paralysis, where my left vocal cord became paralyzed from a virus. So I couldn't sing for 6 months, and I was not used to not being able to perform, and I kind of went through this whole identity crisis during that time because I realized growing up in theater, I always played characters. I didn't have a strong sense of identity.
Okay.
And so during that time of paralysis, I really started writing out my feelings, writing poetry. And luckily my voice was able to recover. And I set up my first show in New York City. Wow. And I kind of just it was like a bug bit me, and I was like, that was fun. It's scary to express yourself. It's such a vulnerable thing to share your life and your stories instead of just playing a character. But it was a really rewarding process. So I've been doing it for about 5 years. But I had the whole background of writing when I was a kid. So yeah.
Well, that's amazing. So you really kind of kickstarted this part of your career around 2017, 18?
Yeah, that was, I think 2017 was the year I had the vocal paralysis. And then once I recovered, I kind of dove in.
Great. Well, one thing obviously I noticed listening to your music or watching your videos, they're very unabashedly queer in this really celebratory, beautiful way. There's no pathos about it. And I think that's something that, is kind of new and fresh. And I wonder, going back, have you gone back to listen to any kind of queer musical influences who were kind of trailblazers in their time?
I mean, the only person I can really think of that was influential for me was Ani DeFranco.
I was
Um,
gonna ask you about Ani because I had a sense. Yeah.
Gosh, thank you. That's so nice. Yeah, I listened to her for years and um, because I was still a theater kid and listening to theater music, but then I just found a lot of commonalities with Ani's music and I felt like it was so fresh and kind of weird sometimes and sexy
Mm.
and so gay, and people told me stories. I'd never gone to an Ani show, but people were like, "Oh, you have to go. There's so many queer women there." And I just wanted to be kind of a part of that culture. And then, of course, now with Brandi Carlile, I feel like she's another example of a very strong queer woman in music that's just kind of, paved the way for other queer artists to be open about their identity.
Yeah, I love that. I probably saw Ani about 7 times back in the 90s.
So jealous.
Yeah, it was wild. Yeah, and of course love Brandy as well. I just watched her in the Canyon Haze last night, the concert she did in Laurel Canyon. It was live streamed on IMAX. I wasn't there in Laurel Canyon with her, but
Right, right.
it was beautiful. Yeah, really
Yeah.
beautiful. So I wonder if you talk a little bit. I mean, these past few years have been so interesting, I think, for artists, especially this time of creating can either be, in the pandemic and all that kind of insanity in the world. I feel like for artists, it can be a time of real fruitfulness or despair, and maybe despair leads to that. I wonder if you'd talk a little bit about, you have the album coming out that's coming kind of off the back of this very strange time. And would you talk about creating at this time?
Wow. Yeah. It's been a journey. I mean, for one thing, I started writing this album right when the lockdown happened because I thought to myself, what am I going to do with this time? I'm out of work. I had all these shows booked and had to cancel them all. And so I was like, okay, I'm just going to, write my next album because I was already about to put out my first one that was done. And I like having projects. So I started writing my first album. And of course, at first, I was trying to think of themes.
Mm.
And I was like, okay, lockdown, being stuck inside. And I was like, okay, no, that's really lame. Like we all just wanted to, at a certain point, we all just wanted escapism, right? So I found myself just consuming anything I could get my hands on. Like I remember my partner and I watched Sound of Music, and it was like so delightful to watch that old movie and just, transport to Austria or
Yeah,
just a different time, even though that's kind of dark at the end, but
right.
gotta admit, but
But
um,
for most of the movie, it's quite delightful.
it's very delightful. Like the first half is like, oh,
Yeah.
so I found myself watching things like that and reading fiction, which I'm not a fiction reader, but I read a lot of fiction. And so it was a time of just I don't know, I think gathering inspiration.
Yeah.
And all of it was very joyful and very escapist. And then when we got out of the the height of the pandemic and suddenly there was a vaccine,
Mhm.
that's when I think more of the depression hit me and kind of the impact of being like, I don't know, I almost feel like I developed some like agoraphobia, to be
Yeah.
honest, because I was working from home. I was doing Zoom calls all the time, and suddenly I was like, it feels scary to go out into the world still, even though there's a vaccine. So I think my friends and I, a lot of us are just still, I don't know, it doesn't feel the same as it did.
Thanks so much to Tracy and Elizabeth. And finally, the Empire State Building is partnering with GLAAD and going purple to celebrate Spirit Day. Spirit Day is the world's largest and most visible display of anti-bullying against LGBTQ+ youth. Now, purple symbolizes the spirit of the rainbow flag. Drag Race fan favorite Jujubee joined GLAAD, Sally Hansen, and Gotham Cheer for the lighting of the tower. And the show's support comes as recent studies show that LGBTQ+ youth face record levels of harassment and bullying. Well, for more information on how you can get involved, visit glad.org/Spirit Day. And for more content and coverage like this, open the Advocate channel, streaming now on Roku, Fire TV, Apple TV, Android TV. You can also download our app on Android and Apple devices. Thank you so much for being with us. I'm Rachel Smith. We'll see you next time on Advocate Today.